Our Big Ten East basketball campus tour closes here in Columbus as I'm joined by Lantern television producers Kevin Lapka and Casey Smith. And guys, Ohio State coming in this season, coming off last year's early first-round exit to 15-seeded Oral Roberts. But how do they look to bounce back and start off strong this year?
You know what? I feel like they already kind of have to a certain extent. When you get a big win like they did against Duke, number 1 overall Duke, unranked, that's sort of a bounce back because sometimes a loss like that you saw last year, when you get upset in the tournament, that's something that can have devastating impacts that last a long time into the next season. So I think there were a lot of people that were concerned Ohio State, that hangover effect from last year's tournament would affect them, and it did early on. You know, those close shaves against Akron and Niagara, but they get that big win against Duke, that's a bounce back, but here's how it becomes determined going forward. Can you do it consistently, right? And that's where you'll see the bounce back start to come back is each year. Last year, what was their highest ranking last year? Was it 2 or 3? I think
it was 2.
I don't think they ever got to 1.
No, there were a couple. They were one game away from being the number 1 seed.
Right, and so and already this year, it's sort of a roller coaster season. If you want to see them bounce back, and you want to see, that loss last year, how it didn't affect them, you're going to have to see wins like this continue, not just once a dime a dozen. They got to happen more consistently, and the way they've looked, I think that's possible.
And one thing they do have, Casey, is experience. Graduate transfers, returning players, including E.J. Liddell and fifth-year senior Kyle Young. They have a roster with over 1,000 games of collegiate experience. So how do they play that to their advantage this year?
Yeah, I think you saw it a couple nights ago with Duke, just being able to overmatch some of those younger guys that Duke has. Coach Mike Krzyzewski, he said that their team is young, especially in a road environment like the shot was the other night. I think it'll help with balancing some of that road environment type jitters, I guess, just because they played in some of the most hostile Mackey Arena. Comes to mind Assembly Hall for Indiana. Just some of these Big Ten environments just have definitely presented some problems. But I mean, with the experience, I think that'll really show up come tournament time because you may not have the most talented team, but if you have some of the best experience, just being there and experiencing that and just knowing the flow of things and stuff like that, especially after the loss to Oral Roberts last year, I think they'll really come to play, and I think that'll be where you see the experience shine the most.
And a guy who will heavily be relied on will be E.J. Liddell. The do-it-all big man has really came up big for the Buckeyes early on in this season, and he's going to have to continue to do that as the season progresses. Getting away from the early away game jitters is probably easier as the season goes on when you've got E.J. Liddell.
It's a lot easier. I mean, that's a guy that, like you mentioned, can do it all. He's great. He's been great defensively. He was racking up blocks in the Fort Myers tournament, and he had the glass block again in the Duke game. He's been playing really well defensively, but you look offensively, he is their offense. I mean, it runs through him, and we know that. The thing that kind of gets you worried sometimes when E.J. Liddell doesn't have a good night, can Ohio State do it outside of him? Because this offense runs through E.J. Liddell, and last year when E.J. Liddell would not have a great scoring night, Dwayne Washington was there to drop 30. And they have Zed Key down below, but when you have a guy as dominant as E.J. Liddell and he's not having a good night, teams are going to key in on those other guys and just rely on defending a guy like Zed Key or defending Justin Arns on the outside or whatever, Malachi Branham and Cedric Russell present. But E.J. Liddell it has been your constant and will be your constant. How he plays is going to determine your success, and he's a heck of a good player who's going to continue to have a good year.
Yeah, for sure, Kevin. To build off that point, E.J. Liddell, especially when he posts up, he's going to get double teamed. There's no doubt about it. What I've seen from him is his increased ability to pass the ball and pass out of that. You saw a nice skip pass to Cedric Russell cross court as he was getting triple teamed. Yeah. Cedric Russell, he bangs a 3. Ohio State with all the momentum to make it a one point lead at that point. So I think that was one area that he's really shined in. I think his mid-range and just his ability to shoot from deep, because when he came in, he was a rim protector, just playing down in the low post, sort of what you see from Zed Key right now. But his ability to start inching out towards the three-point line and be able to knock down the occasional 3, I think that's really important for his game as well, and something that NBA scouts really love to see.
You see the starting 5, first guys in the rotation, Wheeler, Branham, Justice Suing, who's down right now due to injury, E.J. Liddell, Kyle Young, who's back after he started the season with vestibular dysfunction. but with how meticulous Chris Holtmann is and with how much Ohio State has in terms of depth, how do they figure out this rotation and find a clear-cut first 7, 8 guys, or do they stick with a revolving door of players?
I think they stick with the revolving door, honestly. It's who has the hot hand. When you have shooters like that with Justin Arns and Cedric Russell, one night it might be Cedric Russell is looking hot, and if he is not having success early, put in Justin Arns. And I don't think it necessarily matters who's the starter at the beginning of the game because they're going to rotate regardless. I mean, I don't think Cedric Russell is going to give you the full 40 minutes every game, but neither is Justin Arns, and that's just the way it's going to be. But looking into the next game, games going forward, Cedric Russell might be the starter, right? But he starts to go cold a little bit. Sometimes this happens when you're a shooter. Slot in Justin Arns there, and you don't have an issue. But I like how you mentioned the depth because that's going to be the strong point of this team. When you look at their starting five compared to the other previews you've done here in the Big Ten, there are some other starting fives that are better. When you look at Purdue, when you look at Michigan, you look at some of those other rosters, just the starting five that you see on paper, better than Ohio State. But Ohio State does have that depth, and they have some really unique depth. It's a whole lot of different players with Joey Brunk, a guy who hasn't got a whole ton of minutes, but he can play down low. And then you talk about Cedric Russell, and then Jimmy Sotos, and even Michi Johnson, who's been coming off the bench and the things that he can do at the point guard position. So yeah, the starting lineup, it's not necessarily say daunting when you look at it, but what becomes daunting is they're always going to have energy because their depth is going to keep them going throughout the whole 40 minutes.
You've heard throughout these different interviews with our great and fantastic student journalists around the Big Ten that there is more to the starting five. The Ohio State Buckeyes have just been that, and they're going to have to do that as the season goes on, especially with injuries and how they've plagued them a little bit early with guys like Sewing and Kyle Young being out at times. But when fully healthy, Ohio State, a threat to the Big Ten and the entire country. Thank you to Kevin Lapka and Casey Smith, Lantern Television producers, who have been a great help with us in putting together this Big Ten East men's basketball preview. And a big thank you to all of our student journalists around the Big Ten East.